Windows 7 went end of life in 2020, Windows 8 in 2023, and Windows 10 is going end of life on October 14th, 2025. In case you forgot, that's the year we're in right now. Also, in case you forgot, it's March right now, so that's not that long away. And every single time a Windows end of life comes up, the same questions get asked. Doesn't matter if we're talking about XP, doesn't matter about Vista, Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10, or Windows 11 sometime in the future. Every single time. I've discussed this in the past, but now that it's the actual year, I probably should do so again. Are people going to swap to Linux when Windows 10 goes end of life? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm sure some people are going to do so. You'll see posts like this. Should I switch to Linux after Windows 10 support ends? If Windows 11 has you thinking of switching to Linux when 10 reaches EOL, do this first. People are going to do so. I know people who have done so. The number is not going to be 0. But what I mean is this idea that there's going to be a mass exodus of Windows users because Windows 11 is so doo-doo. The AI spying stuff, so bad. People are going to get sick of Windows and they're going to stop using it. You get posts like this. Will Windows users migrate to Linux as Windows 10 end of support is coming soon, especially with OpenSUSE starting an initiative? Now, you probably have no idea what this is even about. I saw this on Reddit a few weeks ago. Basically, they made like a blog post and their website doesn't even load. They made a blog post being like, hey guys, swap over to Linux. Yeah, because this is definitely gonna... This wall of text is definitely going to convince people to go and do so. I don't know what year this was made for, but I feel like this might have worked in like 1993, but we've moved past walls of text since then. Honestly, that felt like a switch to Linux post for people who are already using Linux, which you don't need to convince to use Linux. Anyway. Can the death of Windows 10 convert people to Linux? Honest question, are people seriously moving from Windows to Linux? Yes, but also no. Most people are not. And I get how someone might have this question as a Linux user, as probably a relatively technical person, as someone who very likely has built at least one PC in your past, or at least, changed out a part here and there. You are someone who has somewhat of an understanding of what a computer is and how to use a computer. You've gone out of your way to pick a distro, maybe even pick a desktop that didn't come with the distro, or maybe use one of the different flavors or things like that so you can get the one that you want. You've also learned what software works on Linux, what software doesn't, finding replacement for things you were using before, and you've gone through all of that work. And that's not all, you're also the kind of person who is willing to step slightly outside your comfort zone to try out something new. And especially when you're surrounded by people like this, maybe you hang out in Discord servers, IRC, Matrix, you hang out on Mastodon, you talk to people who use Linux, it can be very easy to forget that you are weird. I'm weird. All of us are a little bit weird because we don't use a computer in the way that the majority of people do. The way that I like to put it is most people don't upgrade Windows. What they do is buy a computer. They buy whatever the computer happens to have on it, right? Like, you don't think about the software that your microwave is running or the software your fridge is running, and most people don't think about the software their computer is running. It is the Windows computer. Is it Windows 10? Is it Windows 11? Does it have a version? I don't know. All I know is maybe they don't even know it has Windows. All they know is they bought a Dell, they bought an HP, and that's the end of the conversation. Now, over the years, Microsoft has made it easier to move to a newer version of Windows. it doesn't help that each newer version is so far apart that the jump is really, really big. This is what Apple does really well, and basically the reason why Microsoft even lets you easily upgrade between versions, because when you buy an Apple device like a MacBook or something like that, you just get a prompt to upgrade to the next version, and it's just treated like a regular software update, so it's not a big deal going to a new version of the operating system. You're still on the Apple operating system. Windows really needs to make it more of a rolling move so people don't have as much disruption in those cases where people even care. But again, most people don't even care to begin with. They treat the computer like an appliance. As you've probably heard before, people won't take Linux seriously. There won't be a mass migration until Linux computers are directly in front of people. With that being said, there is one audience that does have it directly in front of them, and an audience which is more likely to have technical users who are willing to try out different things, who probably have built a computer, who probably have installed an operating system. That being the gamers. There was a time where the only way to game on Linux was native binaries, because yes, Wine did exist, and for very few cases it kinda worked, but native binaries was basically your go-to. Now though, we don't really care about that, because now we have this thing called Proton. And with Proton, alongside a bunch of fixes on the kernel side to make things just generally better, and improvements on the desktop side, like being able to do HDR, having working variable refresh rate, all of these things are nice. And also, because of all these changes, and because Valve has done a lot of amazing work here, a few years back, we saw the release of the Steam Deck, a Linux-powered gaming device, and this sold pretty well. Now, not everybody has a Steam Deck. However, what the Steam Deck has shown to just your average gamer is that you can game on Linux. We're not in 2013 anymore. Yes, there are things that don't work, but for a lot of games, you can just play on Linux. And it's gotten so good that companies outside of Valve are involved in this space. Obviously, there's been a bunch of startups getting involved in this, but Lenovo, they have a handheld that's going to be powered by SteamOS. And for sure, not all of them. There are people that play on console, there are people that they are gamers, but the only game they play is FIFA, and they just rebuy the same FIFA every single year. But gamers do tend to be more prone to build a PC and understand the basics of a computer than the general populace. Now, from a Linux perspective, I do think SteamOS is a bit of a red herring to focus on. Some people think that by using SteamOS is going to fix every single problem. The only way that Linux can be usable is SteamOS on the desktop. No, because 99% of what SteamOS is just a regular distro, and then the extra 1% is something you can just do yourself. But look, if people need to gaslight themselves and use SteamOS to think that Linux is going to be the future, fine, gaslight yourself. In the end, you're still using Linux. It might be Valve Linux, but it's still Linux at the end of the day. Gaming isn't perfect. There's still a lot of issues with anti-cheat, especially. Pretty much only anti-cheat. Like, that's the major issue we've had for quite a while now. There is one or two games which, specifically because of their anti-cheat, lock to the Steam Deck. Sometimes locking to SteamOS on the Steam Deck, but anti-cheat is just generally, still kind of messy. But for everything else, and even some anti-cheat games in cases where they do work, like Marvel Rivals or, Counter-Strike, things like that, but just by having Linux gaming be good, there's a lot of people actually talking about it, and even if you don't use it right now, you're getting a lot of exposure to Linux. Speaking of exposure, speaking of attention, don't underestimate what people who otherwise had nothing to do with Linux, who have a big following, who suddenly start using Linux just out of nowhere does to the approachability of the operating system. I am specifically talking about PewDiePie using Linux in his PC build, but then after the fact, posting about using Arch Linux, Hyperland, ZSH, and Kitty. Now, he didn't specifically mention those other applications, but you could very clearly see a giant Arch Linux logo in the screenshot. And if you paid attention to the screenshot, looked at the fetch application, you could see the rest of it. But the important part there is using Arch Linux. Someone who, until this point, you had no idea had any interest in using it. And yeah, this might just be a single instance, but it's an instance that has a lot of followers, and it's not the only one. There is a bunch of other people all in the same situation, suddenly showing that, hey, you can use Linux. Now, if PewDiePie happens to see this, please can you make a video about you using Arch and like why you posted that, or even just like using Mint like you showed in the other PC build thing. I would very much appreciate that. Like a full Linux video, put a lot of attention onto Linux. Please. That would be great. What it shows is you don't have to be a basement dweller to make use of Linux, because even after all these years, there is still kind of that stigma where you've got to be like super mega nerd to be able to understand Linux. No, like, not really. Yes, it might be a little less convenient than using Windows. Yes, you might need to read a bit more documentation, but it's not 1993 anymore. Like, there are distros that exist that are very, very well developed. With all that being said, I don't expect a mass migration of gamers either, right? If you're comfortable on Windows, you're comfortable on Windows. And a thing that a lot of people seem to forget about is users don't operate around end of life. Businesses operate around end of life. Users operate around the software, right? Even if you're the kind of person who updates your operating system, a lot of those people won't move over until there is something wrong with it, right? The software they want to use no longer works. They want to play some anti-cheat game and it requires you to be on Windows 11. That's when those people move over to Windows 11. If Windows stops getting updated, for a lot of people, that's actually a good thing, because there is this idea in people's mind that because of the way that Windows Update works, where it's so disruptive, it's so annoying, a lot of people don't like their computer updating. Microsoft has convinced people that security updates are bad. Now, the bigger issue for Microsoft isn't people switching to Linux, it's people not switching to Windows 11. So, obviously we don't have perfect numbers for this, but we have been talking about the gamers, so let's continue doing so. Amongst the gamers, the latest Steam hardware survey is a little bit funky because there's this weird 10% rise. Let's just go back to January, where the numbers make a lot more sense. So in January, again, this is 9 months from the EOL of Windows 10. 54% of people are on Windows 11. It went up by 2% that month. 42% are still on Windows 10. Almost half are on your operating system that's going end of life in a couple of months. Yes, there's always a bit of lag in getting people to move over to the newest version of Windows, but this is holdovers like we had back in Windows 8, where people were staying back on Windows 7 and didn't want anything to do with it. Windows 8 had very low adoption. Windows 11 is considerably higher. But this number isn't just going to suddenly go away in the next couple of months. What Microsoft would want is this number to be 0 or effectively 0 by the end of the year. I would be surprised if this is any lower than maybe 30%. And let's think about it like this, right? Let's say there is a Windows 12 or whatever they call it next. Do you actually think it's going to be like what happened with Windows 7, 8, and then 10, where people skipped over 8 and went straight to 10. Do you think that whatever comes out after 11 is not going to be a continuation of everything wrong in Windows 11? Now, I don't really care if people stay on 10 instead of going to 11, or stay on 7 instead of moving up. I do think it's funny, and I'm going to laugh at you, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. But I'm sure that Microsoft, may not be super happy about a fairly large contingent of people staying back on the older operating system. Obviously, business people are moving over. It's not like nobody is migrating to Windows 11. But there is a lot of people who I'm sure they would very much like to be on that operating system. Now, I am ready to be wrong. If people suddenly migrate over to Linux, hey, that's great. Welcome. That's awesome. The channel's here. Watch the videos. Go watch everyone else's. Learn about Linux. And hey, that's cool. You're welcome. Now, I just don't expect it to happen. There'll be some people. I know some of those people. But don't expect there to be suddenly, 15, 20% of the people using Linux. I just don't see it happening. Maybe over time, but not in a couple months. But what do you think? Let me know your thoughts down below. If you liked the video, go like the video. If you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe, Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and what do you use? And why is it not Windows 11?
Something like this.